All right, welcome to Refining Your Logic Model. This is a workshop to help us understand don't know how to get back. Okay, we'll just go with this one. Help us understand how to use logic models. For many people, this might be a repeat. Logic models are pretty common in the nonprofit space. I always find value to revisit mine for whatever organization I'm working in, because every once in a while it brings you new insights. It has budgeting implications, it has strategic planning implications, and overall, it's just a really great tool to make sure that your everyday actions are aligning well with your mission, and you're doing things as efficiently as possible. So what we're going to go through today is just understanding the why behind your impact, really distilling it down to a very simple statement of why. We're going to go through the logic model components. We're going to talk a little bit about outcomes and smart outcomes, and then dive into some practical uses for your logic model. I like this quote. You don't know where you're going. How are you gonna know when you get there? I think this is relevant to logic models because if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing and how we're going to get it done, then we don't really know if we're doing it or not. So diving into impact, and feel free, typically in these, we could just kind of dive through the material and save questions for the end, but feel free to jump in and shout out some examples as we're going through these, because logic models are very participatory. So impact. So this is really a why statement. So what positive change is taking place due to your programming? Really, another way to think about it is overall, what is your long-term impact, or just why are you doing this? Some examples, maybe if you're doing a confidence building program for young people, they're going to live longer, healthier lives. Maybe if you're doing a academic-based program that's going to lead to greater lifetime educational attainment. Kids are going to get to have colleges or degrees or trade schools, and that's going to be a long-time achievement for them. Maybe it's because more open spaces are preserved and protected. So just take a minute to think about and write down what's the end result of the work that you're doing. If anybody feels like shouting it out, you're welcome to. Okay, we're going to move through this pretty quickly. So the operations plan. So this is your logic model components where you're really thinking about operations. So we're going to take that why statement, put it to side for now, and start thinking about your day to day. So in a logic model, you have your inputs or your resources. So what basic resources are needed to do the work? Activities. What's going to happen that is going to create the impact? What are you doing? And then outputs. What are those immediate trackable results? So what are things that you can count? And the outputs are not necessarily your long-term impact. It's just, how are you tracking what you're doing? Is it hours of information provided, kids engaged, miles of trails, acres of land preserved, things like that are very countable. So when you're thinking about your inputs, you're thinking about things you can touch, like papers, pens, tools, shovels, crayons, whatever it is that you're using to do your programming. Maybe it's tumbling pads, yeah, stuff like that. Things that will be a problem if they aren't there is another way to think about it. Your electricity. What if you show up to your space and there's no power? That's an input. That is something that you need to get the project done. Meeting space. Advertising. What if the person that was supposed to advertise it didn't do it and then nobody showed up? That's a thing that you need to make the thing happen that you're doing. Another thing to think about is just anything that costs money. Are you paying facilitators? Are you paying janitors? Are you paying, what is these pieces that cost money to make your program happen? And then also things that don't cost money. Are you the janitor?
Yes.
That is wonderful. You know, you need to understand that that is a piece of what you're doing. If you just stopped doing the janitorial work, or the new person came in behind you and didn't know they had to do that, that would be a problem. So it's all of these pieces are your inputs. It's all the stuff that makes your program possible from a very supplies level. The next thing is your activity. So it's your plan to use the resources. Oh, great. So you got a bunch of books, you got a bunch of crayons. What are you doing with them? Are you throwing them at children? Probably not. You're probably hosting some sort of program. There's probably some sort of training that happens. Maybe it's you're securing conservatorships for land. What is your plan to actually use the resources that you have to work towards your impact? So the more details here, the better. So what's going to take place? When is it going to happen? And who is doing it? So this is just the nuts and bolts of your plan for your impact. The who is doing it is really good to mark out, because that's often a time where you're like, oh, shoot, we didn't factor that into the inputs because I forgot to say we're paying the folks a stipend to do this piece of it. Then your outputs, these are the results, the things you can count. How many of what did you do? Maybe 100 people got 3 hours of training, maybe 10 miles of trail, maybe 30 pets were adopted, 50 kids read 10 books. What are you tracking? What are your numbers that you're working towards? Maybe it's visitors to the museum. Maybe it's events throughout the year, hours of programming, whatever it is that you're working towards. This is a little bit more sophisticated of a quote, but think of a logic model as an architectural blueprint for a program. It visually maps out how the resources and activities lead to the desired outcomes and impacts. All right, so we talked about our why, which is sort of the overarching thing. We've talked about the nuts and bolts that go into a logic model. And now we're going to go into the outcomes. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So a strong outcome, and I would say this is something that a lot of folks struggle with, especially when you're really close to the work, is it's difficult to kind of take your space away, your mind away from the day to day and think a little bit more big picture. Your outcome should say what change is going to take place with who or what, if it's not a human services based program, over what time frame, and how is it measured? And there are different approaches to outcomes, but I'm a big believer in that it should be able to be stated in one sentence. And so if your change is, confidence building in 50 young adults that is going to take place over the next 6 months as measured by post surveys, that's an example of a one sentence outcome. Maybe it's the change is and change, typically we're looking at a change in behavior, attitude, or knowledge. That's human services program. If we're talking about more land-based programs or conservation-based programs, we're going to talk about land preserve, but you could also be changing knowledge of people that understand the reason behind conservatorships. It might be about the actions is the number of acres preserved. It might be that things like that, but what change is going to take place? 50 acres are going to be protected in this space over the next 2 months as measured by completed agreements. Is this making sense? Yes.
A quick question. So I have a lot of properties.
Yes.
So, and I've got 3 properties and they each have their own programs. So how focused do you want me to be on specifics?
So that it's a logic model. That's a great question. A logic model is a tool for you and your organization. If those programs can be summarized, I mean, for instance, we look at the Community Foundation, we do a lot in nonprofit capacity building. We have the fellowship, we have the summit, we have these workshops, we have consultants. Do we look at that as one program, or do we look at those as separate programs?
But maybe as a chunk.
It's really up to you and how your programs are broken out. If it's going to be not helpful to be so detailed and break down by each property and each program and each property, don't do it. If it's going to be not helpful to be too bird's eye view on everything, so kind of find that medium ground where this is going to give you the insight that you need. If it's similar change that's happening, it's probably one program. So for instance, our nonprofit capacity building programs, we're looking to accomplish the same things: improve knowledge, improve skills, improve confidence. That's the change we're seeing. So we kind of summarize all of ours together. And some of your programs are a little bit more straightforward. So you're probably just one of these broken out. But I've worked for organizations that have 10 of these broken out. So you're doing this for each of your programs. It's really up to you of how it's gonna be helpful to you. So, here's some examples of logic models. 50 kids are going to learn how to read within 10 months of tutoring as measured by pre and post exams. 10 teens will increase confidence over the 4-week program as measured by a self-survey. That is a 1-sentence summary of what you're doing and the change that you're going to make. Got a little peanut gallery over here.
Sounds like validation.
Yes. Does anybody want to take a stab at sharing their outcomes? Maybe you already have this figured out, but what's an outcome that you're working towards? Laura, yours are great in your grants. So if you wanna, if I can pick on you, you do a really good job of this.
Only if you get paper. Well, obviously will if you're good at it. One day.
I guess I use a lot of this for like when I'm working with like my outreach like programming, like when we go to the Boys and Girls Club or when we go to Crest Academy and we are going to or if we're working with a certain dynamic of people, you know, we would say something like that. I mean, one of the things we use a lot of is the rose and the thorn. We use that as our example for like that's a way that we gauge within our classes of what kind of expectations we're looking for with surveys. We go on the spot with the kids and we get a lot of really good information with that. Which we plug into. I mean, ours is so similar to these statements, but it really is like, yeah, like 50 kids will learn, but generally it's like we try and do like 120 kids out of 300 will come to our program, and this many kids will get a free class from it or growth and development in this.
Yeah.
No, I on the spot.
I'm sorry for that. But I think this will be, you know, and maybe for like an early childcare program, and Emily, I'm sure you do a great job of this as well, is looking at, you know, 75% of kids will make marked gains on social and emotional development over one semester, as measured by teacher observation forms. Yeah, so are we kind of seeing how this is working into a 1-sentence outcome from your work? In general, if it's taking you more than 1 sentence to get down to what change you're making over what time frame and with who, you probably need to spend a little bit more time refining the book. You agree with that?
Yes.
So on the logic model, you typically are going to have 3 tiers of outcomes. So your immediate this is something that's going to happen immediately on the completion of your program. It is pretty typically easy to measure. So it's the rose and thorn, it's responses from the rose and thorn. It's the number of kids that have developed a new skill. It's the number of students who received a scholarship. It's, you know, people who came to a program. It's what is the immediate thing that's going to happen that you know happened because you were there and you were able to measure it. You know, 50% of the people that attended a event at the museum were able to indicate that they learned more about history. You know, something like that. Intermediate is going to be happening in a little bit longer time frame. So maybe it's 6 months to a year after completing the program, or maybe it builds on the program. Some organizations are structured to be working with kids over a long time or working with people over a long time. And so you're going to see the impact. Maybe your first step is you're working on a skill development. Your second step is a confidence, and that's going to go to the next stage of them having a higher sense of self-esteem. And so these things are your intermediate is the self-esteem, your immediate is the skills and the confidence building. Long-term is often impossible to measure. It's, you know, you're 12+ months out, it's a lifetime impact. You may not be able to get this information. We just don't have we all don't have a full team of researchers tracking people down and asking them, well, what happened, when this happened 12 years ago, what was your, you know, lifetime change? And so this is where you can lean on research data. And so looking especially for youth-based programs, looking at things like the Annie E. Casey Foundation, they have the money to do these studies. They can give you the data that shows you that doing a confidence building activity leads to higher self-esteem, which leads to less addiction. This is all proven stuff that happens. There's research at foundations researching all of this, all of your focus areas out there. And so you don't have to necessarily do it yourself, but you do need to base your outcomes on some available data. Any questions on the difference between the immediate, intermediate, or long-term outcomes? These are going to follow the same format. So it's going to be a change. So maybe 100% of is in the immediate, 100% of the youth completed the requirements to develop a new skill. Intermediate is 50% of those go on to report higher self-esteem after being in the program for 6 months. Long-term is we know that this development gets to this outcome. And so we, based on this data, 70% of the kids are going to have higher educational attainment or less addiction. Here's just some examples. Move this guy over here. And so they're kind of building on each other, but ideally there's some research that is tying these all together, that you know because of the research that this increase in confidence is connected to the increase in self-esteem, which is connected to their long-term greater academic attainment. Here's some more examples. 100 acres of public lands will have a decrease in erosion due to the removal of social trails taking place April through November as measured by soil quality tests. I don't know if that's the right way to measure that, but it sounded good. You can tell where my background is more in the human services than 5 students will have an increased opportunity to attend higher education through scholarships as measured by scholarship awards. So we're gonna pause here. And I'm gonna share a different. So this is what a logic model, it typically would fit on one page. I know I'm a big fan of one page things. Let's see where we go. You guys seeing this online too? I want to make sure I'm capturing you.
Where are you at?
Zoom?
No.
Yeah, that's not great to read, huh? I'll email it out to you. But so this is where you're looking at your activities and your programs on one side, and that's where you can break it down in as many categories as makes sense for your organization. Your inputs is what do you need? Your outputs is what's happening. Then you have your short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And then ideally at the top, you have the big picture. So what is the big picture here? You are creating, long-time healthier lives. You are preventing suicide. You are promoting the preservation, appreciation and preservation of history. What's sort of that big overarching why can go in at the top there. So I like to do as an example, hopefully this doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, but I like to think about a lactation program because it is such a great way to break down the inputs, the outputs, and the short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And so if you have a lactation program, Their activities are their helpline, their workshops, their advocacy. So what are their inputs? Is they have nurse educators, they have venues, they have handbooks that they're handing out, they have kits, they have materials they're giving to moms. The outputs is the workshop attendance, the number of people who called the hotline, it's the instances of advice given, it's the hours of consultation given. Those are the outputs for it. And now we're looking at a change in knowledge, behavior, or attitude. And so 80% of the conference attendees indicated an increased motivation to breastfeed, as measured by the pre-post survey. So there's an attitude that has changed. They're more motivated to try breastfeeding because of attending the program. Intermediate is 350 infants will have increased health through breastfeeding as measured by surveys of lactating parents, indicating the increase in time they were able to breastfeed their child. So that's a behavior change that we're seeing, is that intermediate. And then long-term, over the next 5 years, there will be a decline in hospitalizations for common childhood conditions affecting ages 0 through 5 in the 4 counties targeted by the program. So in this one, I mean, this is more of a public health. They probably have the resources to actually get this data, but that's a more long-term change that they're seeing that is building on the activities and their immediate and intermediate outcomes. Okay. So, all right, you did all this work, you're working through this. Why are you doing this? Well, one, there's budgeting implications. Sometimes you can get into this and realize, wow, we're doing all of these programs over here. All these activities and inputs are going in. I can't really figure out what the outcomes are from that. Why are we doing that? Maybe you've always done that. Maybe because in the past that made sense, but maybe the current research doesn't support it. So thinking through where are you spending your money and to where your biggest impact is, where your outcomes are really materializing, can help you understand maybe where you can be shifting around some resources. Sometimes we have these really feel-good programs. We don't know why we're doing them. And so this can also help justify that. You go through, this happened to me in an organization a few years ago that I was a part of, where I came in and they had this wonderful summer camp program that we did. And everyone knew it was a good idea, but nobody really knew why we were doing it. So I spent a little bit of time on that research and connected it. In this case, it was medically fragile youth would go to a summer camp. Because of their condition, they couldn't go to an average summer camp. So this is their only camp experience. And I was like, well, we're doing this to give them a camp experience. It's like, no, we're doing this to build that confidence, to build that social connection, to build that self-esteem, which is going to give them the confidence to manage their condition throughout their lifetime. And so spending some time on that helped me justify why we were spending so much time and energy on this one program that we hadn't done the time to do our own science behind. It can be a team management tool. It can really help people take away from their tasks of, you're not just scheduling events, you are helping support these outcomes. Every event that you're scheduling is turning into this impact. It can help you adjust your program and evaluation strategy. When you spend a little time on understanding what those outcomes are, it might change the way you're evaluating your programs. If you're looking at, okay, well, the real change we're making here is XYZ, but we're not actually measuring that. We're measuring something else completely. Can we shift the questions we're asking in our surveys or how we're going about tracking what we're doing? And then strategic planning, just understanding where your resources are going in, where you're having your most impact. It can help you adjust your strategy to either beef up those programs that are having the most impact, or maybe move away from those programs that are taking a ton of resources but aren't having that same level of impact. All right, well, we are just about at time and it looks like my laptop is going to die. So I am going to stop recording and then we can just do some question and answer.